Okay, so today we're going to be discussing how to solve equations with square cube roots. So the reason we would ever use roots to solve an equation is if we have an exponent, right? So if I have something like, let's say like 2 squared. Well, let's do a different number. Let's say 4 squared, right? 4 squared is 16. Now, let's say I want to go back to what I started with. So back to this original number. Okay, how do you undo a square? Well, you do it by doing the opposite operation. So, the opposite operation. So, let's think about that. So, if you were to add something, the opposite operation is subtract, right? And vice versa. Those are opposite operations. If you were to multiply something, the opposite operation would be to divide. Again, opposite operations. Now, when you were to raise something to an exponent, so like 4 squared, the opposite operation would be the root or the square root. Those are opposite operations. Exponents and roots are opposite operations. So if we have something being raised to an exponent and we need to undo it to go backwards, we use our square root function again, or a cube root if it's a cube, or whatever root if it's an even bigger exponent. But again, the square root button is usually the second option of your squared button. So you would do like second square root and then 16, and it should give me back the number that I squared to get there, right? It gives me 4. So opposite number there, opposite operation. So if we look at something like number 1 here, and this is on page 33 in the book, we see s squared is equal to 49. Well, that's great. That's what s squared is, right? But if I want to figure out what that number, what that variable is without the square, I have to undo the square, right? To undo the square, you have to do the opposite operation. So I would have to square root both sides. So again, square root is, if you were to square something, it would be like s times s, right? Square root basically just gets rid of that extra number and focuses on just the number that's multiplying by itself. So the square root of s squared would just be s, okay? And then the square root of 49 is going to be a couple of different things. Your calculator says just 7, right? But we know that square roots can have 2 different roots, right? There can be a positive or a negative possibility. And this will come back quite a bit, or in secondary 2, which is a couple years away for you guys. But this is a key piece of knowledge. Anytime you square root something, there are 2 possibilities. So s could either equal a positive or a negative 7. And that would be your answer. Okay? So not too much. I mean, you're just squaring it, right? If it's a cube, then I would have to cube root it, right? I have to do a cube root, which in our calculator, that means that 3 cube root. So you have to push 3 and then the multi-root button, and then just like we did with cube roots yesterday, and then plug in 216, and we would get 6. Now cube roots only have 1 root, so if it says 6, then your answer is just 6. Okay, so r is going to be equal to 6. There's only 1 root with cube roots. Basically, if you have an odd root, there's only 1 root. If you have an even root, like if it's a square or a 4th root or a 6th root, there's going to be 2 possible roots. Okay? Because if you multiply a number with each other even amount of times, then it's going to end up balancing out if it started out negative. So you're going to have 2 different possibilities. Okay. So that's basically the idea here. Let's do a few more examples just to make sure we got it. So so this is another cube one, so we're going to do a cube root on this one. So 1,000 to the cube root is 10. So h would equal 10. Not too tough, right? Let's look at another one. Y squared. So that means I'm going to use a square root since it is squared. So square root of 2,704 is, my calculator says 52, but again, since it's a square root, it needs to be a plus or minus 52, because it could be either of those possibilities. Now, number 5, we're going to square root, because it's a square, but it's a negative 144. What happens when I square root a negative number? Error. Doesn't work, right? Because if you square a number, it's never going to be negative. So there's no possibility to go back and find a negative root. So that's why these are plus or minus, these square roots, because there could be a positive or a negative possibility. You don't know because an even root is always going to be positive. So that means that this is just not possible. X squared cannot equal negative 144, so there is no solution here. This is going to be one of the things that tricks up most of you guys. You get into this groove of square rooting and cube rooting, but then when you run into this negative, you don't know what to do. Again, if you try to square root a negative, it's going to be wrong. It doesn't work. That being said, if I look at this one, that's a cube root, so h to the third. So if I cube root it, it's a negative number, right? Let's see what happens when I plug a negative number into my calculator. So 3 cube root of negative 5832. It does not have a problem with it, right? You can have a negative cube root. So h is going to equal negative 18. And that would be your answer. And that's pretty much all it boils down to. So again, if I were to do like number 13, that's s squared, and that's a negative 1. You can't square root a negative 1, so that would be a no solution. Your calculator is going to yell at you if you try and plug it in. So, no solution. Okay. I think that's pretty good. If you guys have any questions or concerns, email your teachers, talk to your teachers. We're here to help. We want to help, and we'll see you guys out there. Sometimes.